Get your filthy hands off my counter, boy! Hands where I can see them right now!
Kurt Bannister didn't just yell. He slammed his palm onto the black walnut desk. His face twisted with pure disgust as he stepped into the light. He didn't even look at the verified reservation screen. He grabbed Elias's faded university sweatshirt by the throat, knuckles digging in, and sneered loud enough for all 40 people in the lobby to freeze.
I know exactly what you are! People with your black skin don't book $1,400 suites! You drift in off the street like rats to case the floor, waiting for a real guest handbag to steal. I can smell the ghetto on you the second the door turns.
Amara kept her voice steady, stepping between them.
Sir, we are guests. My card cleared.
Shut your mouth! Don't you dare insult my intelligence!
Bannister barked. With a vicious yank, he ripped Elias's sweatshirt right at the seam, then turned and struck Amara's hand away, shoving them both toward the revolving doors.
This is a 5-star establishment, not a homeless shelter for people like you. Get out into the rain before I have the police throw you out like the garbage you are!
He thought he was just cleaning up his floor. He had no possible way of knowing that the black woman he had just assaulted in front of 40 witnesses signed the paycheck he cashed at 4:11 that afternoon, and she was about to strip him of his badge, his freedom, and his entire life. Welcome back to the silent verdict, where corporate power meets absolute justice. If you're ready to watch a racist security chief get broken by the very woman he thought he could humiliate, don't move a muscle. Let's look at the tape to understand how a man in a bathrobe, holding a travel mug of coffee, ends up in the back of a police car, to understand how the most powerful person in that lobby turned out to be the woman he was shoving into the rain. You have to go back 11 hours, before the tear, before the shove, before the report he would type that night with a line in it he'd written 100 times, back to a rented lake house, 40 minutes north of the city. On the last easy morning Kurt Bannister would ever have, and never know it. It starts the way these stories always start, with 2 ordinary-looking people and a car. Amara Bishop woke before the alarm, the way she always did the morning before something enormous, and lay still in the dark of a rented lake house 40 minutes north of the city, listening to her husband breathe. Elias slept like a man with nothing on his conscience, which he was, one arm thrown over his eyes, the other resting on the small of her back, warm and heavy and utterly certain of its welcome. 21 years of marriage, and he still slept touching her. She did not move. She let herself have the quiet. By Monday morning, 62 hours from now, her name would be on the front of the business section of 3 papers. Halcyon Meridian Partners, the investment firm she had built out of a single leased office and a great deal of other people's doubt, had just closed the largest acquisition of its history, the entire Ashford collection. 9 historic hotels across 4 cities, the crown jewel of which was the century-old Grand Ashford on Michigan Avenue, $2.5 billion, signed 9 days ago. Embargoed until Monday, when the wire would cross and the phone would not stop for a year. For 20 years, Amara had been rich the way she preferred to be rich, invisibly. No magazine profiles, no galas with her name over the door. She had watched what public wealth did to people, how it hollowed them, how it taught them to expect a certain shape of room and a certain temperature of welcome. And she had decided a long time ago that she would rather keep the person Elias had married than trade her for a version who could no longer walk into a diner without counting the exits. But money that large does not stay quiet forever. Monday, the invisibility ended, so she had planned this one ordinary weekend. The last of them, at the flagship she now owned, but no one there knew she owned. She wanted to see the Grand Ashford, the way a guest sees it. Before the leadership transition, before the new signage, before the entire staff learned to arrange their faces when she walked by, she wanted one honest look at the thing she had bought and one honest weekend with the man who had loved her when she had nothing but a business plan and a chip on her shoulder, the size of the lake. "You're thinking loud again," Elias said, without moving his arm off his eyes. "I'm thinking quietly. Amada. I can hear the gears." She smiled at the ceiling. "Happy anniversary. By the way, officially, it's Sunday. I'm getting ahead of it." "You always get ahead of it." He rolled toward her. Finally, one eye open. 21 years. "You know what I remember about the first one? You gave me a used dictionary. I gave you a good used dictionary. Leather. Somebody's grandmother's. You had a paperback held together with a rubber band, and I couldn't afford a new one. So," he kissed her shoulder, "you've never once let me forget it was used. Because it was the best gift anybody ever gave me, and I don't want you to think I've forgotten it." He went quiet at that. Then, "You nervous about Monday?" "No, Amada. A little. There it is." She turned to face him. In the gray pre-light, his face was the same face, older, gantlet. The temples gone, the color of steel wool. The laugh lines deeper, but the same face that had looked at her across a community college study group in 2001 like she was the only interesting thing in the room. He taught American history to 16-year-olds on the South Side for $51,000 a year and had turned down, more than once, jobs she could have arranged that paid 10 times that. Because, he said, the kids at Douglas didn't have enough people who'd stayed. He drove a 9-year-old Honda. He wore, at that very moment, hanging on the back of the door, a Fisk University sweatshirt so old and so washed that the gold letters had faded to the color of weak tea. He was, in every way that a stranger's eyes could measure in a lobby, an ordinary man. That was the part the stranger would get catastrophically wrong. One weekend, she said. No phones, no wire crossing, just the hotel, and you, and terrible room service pancakes. Then Monday, I become a headline, and you go back to teaching the reconstruction to children who'd rather be on their phones. And we survive it. Like we survive everything. Deal, he said. But I'm wearing the sweatshirt. Elias. It's a 5-star hotel. Not a summit. I'm wearing the sweatshirt. Fisk is a fine institution. He was already grinning. You married a man of the people. I married a man who refuses to buy new clothes. Samamun. Cheaper. He kissed her. And the argument, like most of their arguments, dissolved into the thing underneath it, which was that after 21 years, they still liked each other, which is rarer than love and harder to keep. They drove down to the city that afternoon under a sky the color of pewter. The lake to their left, going the same slate as the clouds. Whitecaps chewing at the breakwater. Rain by nightfall. The radio said. Amara drove her own car, a 5-year-old sedan. Sensible. Unremarkable, because she had let the service driver go for the weekend. The way she let people go whenever she wanted to feel her own hands on her own life. She did not know it yet. But that decision, no driver, no entourage. A professor, in a faded sweatshirt. A woman in linen slacks and worn white sneakers. An ordinary car pulling under an extraordinary awning was the whole difference between the weekend she had planned and the one she was about to have. Because at the Grand Ashford, your car tells them who you are before your mouth gets a chance to. The Grand Ashford rose off Michigan Avenue like a cathedral that had decided to go into hospitality. 22 stories of limestone and copper. Opened in 1921. Restored 4 times. The kind of building that had a name for its ballroom and a name for its bar, and a doorman whose great-grandfather had also been a doorman there. Bronze doors. a porte-cochere held up by columns thick as old oaks, a flag with the hotel's crest snapping in the wind coming off the lake. The valet stand sat under the awning, staffed that evening by a young man in a burgundy vest, and, a few feet behind him, an older doorman named Walter, who had opened that bronze door for 31 years and could tell you the year of any car that pulled up without looking at the badge. Amara eased her sensible sedan to the curb. The valet, young, harried. A line of black cars behind her glanced at the sedan, then at the woman driving it, then past her at a Bentley idling 3 cars back, and made the calculation that men in burgundy vests are taught to make in 100 small ways they'd swear they weren't taught. He walked to the Bentley first. Elias watched it happen with the mild, unsurprised patience of a man who had been watching it happen his entire life. He didn't say anything. Amara didn't either. She put the car in park, took the ticket the valet eventually, distractedly, handed her without quite meeting her eyes, and stepped out into the wind. That was when the older doorman, Walter, crossed the distance in 4 steps and reached the door before anyone. Evening, folks. Welcome to the Grand Ashford. He had a voice like a cello and the posture of a man who had decided a long time ago that his own dignity did not depend on anyone else granting it. He looked at Elias's faded sweatshirt and Amara's sneakers, and something in his face did not change at all. First time with us? Or are you coming home? First time, Amara said, and warmed to him instantly. It's beautiful. She was built to be. He held the bronze door. Anything you need this weekend? You ask for Walter. I'm always the tall old man at the door. Thank you. Walter. Amara meant it. She filed his name away, the way she filed everything away. Inside, the lobby did what the lobby was designed to do, which was to make you feel both welcomed and assessed at the same time. Marble underfoot in a pattern like the surface of a frozen lake. A ceiling 40 feet up, painted in the 20s with a mural of Lake Michigan and now lit like a museum. A fireplace you could have parked the Honda in. The smell of cut lilies and old money, and underneath it, 100 years of cigar smoke that no restoration would ever fully lift out of the stone. And people, well-dressed, well-fed, well-defended people, moving through the space, with the ease of those who have never once been asked to prove they belong somewhere. A young bellhop hurried past with a cart stacked high with matched luggage. And a guest, a heavy-set man in a blazer, red-faced from the bar, snapped at him. Watch it. Watch it. That's a $40,000 set of Rimowa. You're not carrying groceries. The bellhop 19. Maybe. Finn. A name tag that read THEO froze. Ducked his head. Murmured an apology that was more instinct than sentence. His hands, Amara saw, were shaking slightly. And not from the weight. Elias was already moving. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. He stepped in beside the cart, the way he'd step between 2 of his students in a hallway. Easy. Unhurried. Taking up exactly enough space to change the geometry of the moment. That's a beautiful set of bags, he said to the red-faced man. Pleasantly. You must travel a lot. And then, before the man could reorient, Elias put one hand under a corner of the top case and lifted, steadying the cart. Here. So. This one's shifting. You got it now. Yes. Sir. Thank you. Sir. You're not carrying groceries. Elias agreed. Warmly. To the bellhop. Loud enough for the red-faced man to hear his own words. Come back, sanded smooth. You're carrying $40,000. That's a lot of responsibility for whoever hired you to trust you with. He said it looking at Theo. But it landed on the man in the blazer, who suddenly found somewhere else to be, and drifted off toward the elevators. Theo let out a breath. You didn't have to do that. Sir. What's your name? Theo. Sir. Theo Mensa. Elias. This is my wife. Amara. How long you been here? Theo. 6 weeks. A shy grin. The first one. Nights and weekends. I'm at Truman College during the day. Community college. Nursing track. Hopefully. If I can get the prereqs done. Nursing. Elias nodded slowly. The way he nodded when a student said something that mattered. My mother was a nurse. Nights. For 30 years. At Cook County. She said the night shift was where you found out who a hospital really was. Because the daytime is all show. He clapped the young man once on the shoulder. You keep at it. The world needs more people who show up at night. Amara had drifted a half step back to let her husband do the thing. Her husband did better than anyone alive, which was make an invisible person feel, for 30 seconds, like the most visible person in the room. When Theo turned to push his card on, she caught his eye and pressed something folded into his palm. $200. Quiet. No ceremony, and said only, for the prereqs, don't argue with me. I'm older than you. Theo looked down at his hand and back up at her, and his eyes were suddenly bright. Mom, I can't. You can. What's your mother's name? Grace. She's not well right now. Actually, that's part of why I'm. He stopped himself. Embarrassed. Then tell Grace a stranger, said she raised a good one. Amara smiled. Go on. Your cart's shifting again. He went, and 40 feet away, near the concierge desk, a man in a dark suit with an earpiece and 11 years of self-appointed authority watched the whole exchange, the faded sweatshirt, the ordinary sedan the valet had left for last. The cash pressed into a bellhop's palm and drew from it exactly the wrong conclusion. Kurt Bannister had seen a lot of things in 11 years at the Grand Ashford. He had seen, in his own private and unshakable opinion, exactly what kind of person belonged in this lobby and exactly what kind didn't. And he had learned to trust what he called his instinct, which was in truth just his prejudice, wearing a lanyard. He watched a black man in a cheap sweatshirt hand money to one of the staff, and a black woman in sneakers he could not price per gay. And he did not see two of the most decent people who would walk through his door that year. He saw a problem to be managed. He clicked his radio once. He started walking. It was the last easy walk across that lobby he would ever take. The front desk of the Grand Ashford was a 40-foot slab of black walnut, backed by a wall of antique key hooks, kept for decoration now. The real keys, long since gone digital. Behind it stood 2 agents. One was a tired-looking man near the end of a double. The other was Marisol Vega Mari, to the 3 people who knew her 26. 6 weeks off her probationary period. Still new enough to believe the training videos meant what they said, Amara approached with the ticket in her hand and the easy manner of a woman who had checked into 1,000 hotels. Checking in. Bishop. Suite 1404. Arriving today. 2 nights. Mari's fingers were already on the keyboard. Welcome to the Grand Ashford. Miss Bishop. Let me just. She found the reservation. Her face did the small, pleasant thing a good desk agent's face does. There you are. Suite 1404. Lakeview. Checking out Sunday. I've got a note here that you requested. A quiet floor. Amara said. And no wake-up calls. No wake-up calls. Mari smiled, reaching for the key packets. Can I get a card on file for incidentals? And I'll have Theo bring your poliv.com. That won't be necessary. The voice came from Amara's right. Close. And it arrived with a smell sharp aftershave over the iron tang of a man whose adrenaline was already up. Kurt Bannister had positioned himself at the corner of the desk in the half-second before Mari could finish her sentence. He was smiling. It was not a smile that had anything to do with warmth. It was the smile of a man who had decided how a conversation was going to end before it began. Evening. Folks, he said. Kurt Bannister, Director of Guest Safety. I'm going to need to see some identification and a physical confirmation of your reservation before we go any further. Mari blinked. Mr. Bannister, I have the reservation right here. It's confirmed. I just pulled. I heard you. Marisol. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Amara. Then let them travel slow. Deliberate. A hand patting down a stranger's pockets without touching them down to Elias's faded sweatshirt. Across to Amara's sneakers. To the sensible sedan key fob in her hand. And back up. I'll handle it from here. Is there a problem? Amara asked. Her voice did not rise. It never would. No problem at all. Mom. As long as everything checks out. Bannister planted himself. We've had a rash of incidents lately. People booking rooms they can't cover. Running up charges. Disappearing. People coming in off the street to work the lobby. So we've tightened up. Nothing personal. He said nothing personal the way men say it, right before the most personal thing they're going to say. I'm just going to need to see your identification. Mom. And I'm going to need a valid card. And I'm going to need to understand how a reservation for a $1,400 a night suite came to be under your name. Elias's jaw moved. Ons. My wife just gave the reservation number to your agent. It's confirmed. What exactly are you asking? I'm asking her. Boy. Not you. The word landed in the quiet lobby, like a coin dropped on the marble. Mari's hand stopped moving over the keyboard. At the fireplace. One of the men in blazers lowered his bourbon. You want to try that again? Elias said. Still quiet. Quieter now. In fact, which was worse, I want, Bannister said. And his voice climbed now. Pitched to Carrie. Because a man like this always performs for the room. To see the two of you produce a legitimate form of payment? Or I want the two of you to step away from my desk. This is a 5-star establishment. It is not a shelter. It is not a place where you drift in and pretend. And I have watched people exactly like you try it before. People exactly like you. Amara reached, without hurry, into the leather folio she carried, and set on the black walnut a driver's license and a matte black credit card that Mari, 6 weeks on the job, did not recognize, but that the tired agent beside her did. Because he went very still, Bannister picked up the card, turned it over, ran his thumb across it like he could feel whether it was real. He set it back down with a small, contemptuous tap. Anybody can carry a card, he said. Doesn't mean it clears. Doesn't mean it's yours. Run it. Amara said. Excuse me, you said it might not clear. Run it. Charge the incidentals. Let's find out. Something flickered behind Bannister's eyes, then the first cold draft under the door of his certainty, because he had not expected calm. He had expected the two things. He always got fear. Or fury. Fear he could escalate. Fury he could call security about. What he had not planned for was a woman looking at him the way a prosecutor looks at a witness she has already decided to break. Sliding a black card across the desk and saying, "Run it." He did not run it. He did what men like him do when the ground shifts. He got louder. You know what I don't like your attitude. Either of you. You come in here dressed like that, a jerk of his chin at the sweatshirt driving what you're driving. Throwing cash at my staff like you're trying to buy a witness. And now you want to give me orders. On my floor, he was breathing through his nose. Now. Fast. A man finishing a workout he'd been waiting all shift to start. "No, we're done. I want both of you off this property. Now." "Mr. Bannister." Mari's voice was shaking, but she said it. "Sir, the reservation is verified. The card is on the account. I don't understand what... Did I ask you?" "Marisol," he wheeled on her. And for a second, the whole ugliness of the man turned her direction. And she flinched. And he turned back. Satisfied. To the couple. "You've got 30 seconds to walk out that door on your own. Or I call the police and have you removed. And I promise you, the report I write will not read the way you'd like it to." Amara did not move. Neither did Elias. "I'd like your last name spelled correctly for that report," Amara said. "It's Bannister 2 N's. And that the calm, the correctness, the small, terrible courtesy of it was the thing that broke him." He came around the corner of the desk. "That's it. You're out." He grabbed the sleeve of Elias's sweatshirt at the shoulder, knuckles digging into the joint, and yanked. The old fabric, 20 years of it. The fabric Amara had threatened 100 times to throw away, and Elias had hidden 100 times in the back of the closet, gave a small, audible tear at the seam. "Get your hand off me," Elias said. Low. And to his eternal credit, he kept his hands open and at his sides. Palms visible. Doing in real time the arithmetic, every black man in America is forced to learn what it costs to be right. And what it costs to look like you might be about to do something. When a man with a badge is putting his hands on you in front of 40 witnesses and 100 years of stone, you'll leave when I walk you out. Bannister marched him 3 steps toward the revolving door. Elias stumbled once. Caught himself. The luggage cart Theo had left by the wall rattled. Amara moved to follow. And her hand came up, just her fingertips. Just reaching for her husband's wrist. The oldest reflex there is, and Bannister saw the motion and turned and knocked her hand down. The sound of his palm against the back of her hand was not loud. It was a small, flat, human sound, but in a lobby gone silent as a church. 40 people heard it. The bride-to-be at the candlelit table made a noise, not a word. Just a breath. The breath of a person watching something they will replay for years and wish they had interrupted. "Don't you two put on a show?" Bannister said, spit-flecking the air. "Don't you cover for each other? I know what I'm looking at. You people always think you can talk your way past it. Not tonight. Not on my floor. You people." He hit the revolving door with the flat of his hand, and the brass drum began to turn. And the cold came in October. Off the lake. Rain now. Needling. And he put his palm flat between Elias's shoulder blades and shoved him into the moving door. Hard enough to make the point. Not hard enough to knock him down. Which is its own kind of cruelty. The kind that leaves no mark to photograph. Elias went through. His shoulder caught the brass frame. He grunted. He did not fall. Amara went next. Under her own power. Her chin level. And as the door swallowed her, she turned her head once and looked back through the glass at the lobby, at the 40 people standing in the gold light, and every one of them, to a person, found something else to look at. The man at the fireplace studied his bourbon. The family from Dayton pulled their children a half step closer and looked at the floor. The pianist put his hands back on the keys. Diane Pruitt. The night duty manager, 49 years old, 18 years with the hotel, stood 10 feet from the desk with a clipboard against her chest like a small shield. And she had watched the entire thing. And she said, at last, the only thing she said, which she directed not at the couple in the rain, but at Bannister's back. "Kurt, keep your voice down. The guests are uncomfortable." She did not say that was wrong. She did not say, "What did you just do?" She said, "Keep your voice down." And then she looked at her clipboard. Only 2 people in that lobby moved toward the door. The first was Walter, the doorman, 31 years at his post, who came in off the porte cochere, fast for a man his age, saw the couple standing in the rain under the awning, and did the one thing his job actually let him do, which was open the outer door for them and say, quietly, with a rage he was far too disciplined to show, "Ma'am, sir, there's an overhang here. Get out of the wet. I've got you." He put himself between them and the doors, an old man in a long coat, and glared through the glass at the back of Kurt Bannister's head with 31 years of everything he'd swallowed. The second was Mari. She came out from behind the desk. She did not have a plan. She had 6 weeks of employment and a hammering heart, and a thing her grandmother used to say about the difference between what's easy and what's right. And she walked toward the revolving door before her fear could catch up to her legs. Bannister saw her coming and pointed one finger at her. Not even a word. Just the finger. The way you'd stop a dog. And Diane Pruitt said, "Marisol, back to the desk. Now." And Mari stopped, caught between the manager's order and the door. And in that half-second of hesitation, the couple was already gone into the rain. And the moment to be brave the loud way had passed. But Mari did not go back to the desk. She stood there. And she took out her phone not to record. That thought didn't come to her, and she opened the Notes app. And she typed, with shaking thumbs, the time, 8:52 in the evening. And then, underneath it, guests in suite 1404. Reservation verified in system. Card on file. Removed from property by C. Bannister. Physical contact. Racial statements. I saw it. She did not know yet what she would do with it. She just knew. The way you know a burn, the instant before you feel it. That someone in this building was going to try to make the true thing disappear. And that she was going to be the reason it didn't. Under the awning. In the rain. Elias picked a shard of thread off his torn sleeve and let it fall. "You okay?" he asked Amara. "I will be." "You're shaking." "I'm cold." She looked at her own hand, the back of it, where a stranger's palm had landed, and turned it over. And made a fist. And opened it. "And I'm not shaking because I'm scared." She looked up at him. Her eyes were dry. They would stay dry. "I'm shaking because I'm deciding something." Amara. He knew that voice. He'd heard it maybe 4 times in 21 years. And every time the world had rearranged itself afterward. "What are you deciding?" She took out her phone. "I'm deciding how much of Monday to bring forward to tonight." She scrolled to a single contact and pressed it. 2 rings. Amara. Dana Ferreira's voice. Sharp and immediate, even at 9 on a Friday night. Dana had been Halcyon Meridian's general counsel for 14 years and Amara's friend for longer. She could read her boss's silences over a phone line the way sailors read weather. "It's late, and you're calling me the weekend before the announcement. Tell me nothing's wrong with the deal." "Nothing's wrong with the deal. The deal's perfect." Amara stepped further under the awning. Out of the wind. Elias stood beside her. One hand at the small of her back now. Grounding her. "Donna, I need you to do some things tonight. Right now, before anybody at the Grand Ashford knows to touch anything." A pause. The particular pause of a lawyer recalibrating from friend to counsel. "Go. Preserve every camera in the building from 6 o'clock tonight forward. Lobby. Front desk. The porte cochere. The elevators. Every back-of-house angle. Every hallway. I want it copied to our servers by midnight, and I want it done by our people. Not theirs. Nobody at the property touches the footage. Done. What am I preserving it for? The director of guest safety put his hands on me and my husband 40 minutes ago and threw us out of the flagship into the rain. In front of a full lobby, with a verified reservation and a card on the account. The line went silent for 3 full seconds. When Dana spoke again, her voice had changed the same way Gregory's would have. The same way any good friend's does when the abstract becomes the person you love. Are you hurt? No. Amara. Are you hurt? I'm standing under an awning in the rain and I'm fine. Elias is fine. His sweatshirt's torn. A breath. Preserve the cameras. Preserving. What's the man's name? Kurt Bannister. Director of Guest Safety. Employed through the vendor Redline Protective Group, which, if I remember the due diligence correctly, is a security contractor whose master services agreement rolls up under the management company, which as of 9 days ago rolls up under us. Amara's voice was flat and level and terrible. So pull that contract too. And Dana, one more thing. This is the part I need you to just do, without asking me why. Until later. When have I ever asked why? Until later. Pull the incident reports. Every suspicious person report. Every trespass. Every guest ejection Bannister has filed or been involved in, going back the full length of his tenure. 11 years. And pull the lost and found ledger, and pull whatever they call the executive protection detail, the off-book stuff. The cash side. The extra service some guests pay for so nobody bothers them. Pull the shift logs for the vendor and match them against payroll. Another pause. You think there's more than tonight. I know there's more than tonight. How? Amara watched a cab hiss past on Michigan Avenue. Its tires throwing a fan of water. Its light off. Inside the lobby, through the rain-streaked glass, she could see Bannister smoothing his blazer, nodding at a guest as he passed. A man returning from an errand he felt good about, because a man doesn't move the way he moved tonight the first time, she said. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't improvising. He had a routine. The card in the hand, the turn of it, the little tap, the way he told me the report wouldn't read the way I'd like. That's not a man who lost his temper. Donna, that's a man doing a thing he's done 100 times and stopped being afraid of getting caught for. I've built companies by learning to read exactly that kind of face across a negotiating table. A man who steals from people's dignity that smoothly is stealing from them in the other rooms too. I'd put the whole acquisition on it. A beat. Pull the ledgers. Let's find out if I'm right. And Dana, if I'm wrong about the ledgers, he's still finished for tonight. That's not in question. But if I'm right, then he's not a bigot who lost his cool. He's a thief who's been using a badge and a color as his cover to do the stealing, and those are two different men, and they get handled two very different ways. Monday morning, it'll all be on your desk. Monday morning, Amara said, and hung up, and stood in the rain a moment longer. And then she did the thing that would define what kind of owner she was going to be. She turned to Walter, the doorman, who had planted himself by the door like a sentry. And she said, Walter, thank you. I won't forget it. And then, because it mattered, what time do you get off? Midnight. Mom, get home safe. You too. Mom. He hesitated. An old man weighing 31 years of learned silence against something he could not. Tonight. Keep down. For what it's worth. That's not the house. That's him. It's been him for a long time. Some of us have watched it. Some of us didn't know what we could do about it. I know exactly what can be done about it. Amara said, Watch. The revolving door turned. Kurt Bannister stepped out under the awning, into the cold, and looked left, then right, and saw them still standing there, a black couple under his porte-cochere. Not gone. Not scattered. and something in his face curdled. "I told you to get off the property." Elias said nothing. Amara said nothing at first. She simply looked at him. "This awning," she said finally, "is part of the property." "You're right. We're waiting for our car. Your valet has the ticket." She held up the fob. "You can escort us to it. If you'd like. I'd appreciate the company. Don't get smart with me." Bannister stepped closer, dropping his voice to the register he saved for the moments without witnesses. The ugly private register underneath the performing one. "I don't know what game you think you're running. Standing out here, taking down my name, playing lawyer, but you picked the wrong hotel. And you picked the wrong night. And you picked the wrong man to try it with. I see you on this property in 10 minutes. I'm calling the police. And I'm telling them you're trespassing and casing the building. And let me tell you something. They're going to believe me, and they're going to look at you. And we both know how that ends." Amara lifted her eyes to his and held them. "We'll see," she said. "How it ends." She said it so quietly, and so certainly, that Bannister, a man who had won every one of these staring contests for 11 years, blinked first. He held it a second longer, trying to recover. Then he turned and pushed back through the revolving door into the warm gold light, and the drum spun shut behind him with a soft, expensive, almost polite little sigh. The valet brought the sedan around. Walter opened the door for Amara himself. They pulled out into the rain and drove north in silence for a long time, the wipers keeping a slow, tired rhythm. The city lights smeared across the wet glass. Elias spoke first. "At a red light on Lakeshore Drive. The lake a black, nothing to their right. You're going to fire him." "I'm going to do more than fire him." "I know." He reached over and put his hand on her knee. "I'm not asking you not to. I watched a grown man tear a sweatshirt off my shoulder and hit your hand, and I have been sitting here for 15 minutes making myself keep my hands open. And I am not a saint." "Amada." "I wanted to." He stopped, breathed. "I'm not asking you not to. I'm asking you to make sure that when you do it, you're doing it because of what he did. And not just because of who he is. Because those are going to feel like the same thing tonight, and they're not." She looked at him. That was the thing about Elias. 21 years. And he was still, somehow, her conscience with a driver's license. "That's exactly what I told Dana." She said, "Good." He squeezed her knee. "Then I married the right woman. Again." The light turned green, back at the lake house. The rain drumming on the cedar shingles. Amara opened her laptop on the kitchen table and pulled up the closing binder for the Ashford acquisition. She did not need to. She knew what it said. But she wanted to see it. In the same way you press on a bruise to confirm it's real, Halcyon Meridian Partners' acquisition of the Ashford collection. 9 hotels. Closed 9 days ago. Held 3 layers down. Through an entity called Lakeshore Heritage Holdings. The management agreement for day-to-day operations. The vendor schedule a list 40 lines long of every service contractor the properties used. And there, fourth from the top, alphabetized between a linen service and a landscaper redline protective group. Master Services Agreement. Renewed at acquisition. Authorized signatory Amara O. Bishop. Chairman. She had signed for the security firm whose badge Kurt Bannister had used to put his hand on her husband. She had, in the most literal and legal sense possible, signed the paycheck he had cashed that afternoon. Elias came and stood behind her chair and read over her shoulder and let out a long breath through his nose. "He works for you," Elias said. "He works for me. He put his hands on us. In a building you own. With your signature on his contract, while the manager stood there and told him to keep his voice down." "Yes." Elias was quiet a moment. Then, because he had known this woman for 2 decades and knew where her ferocity came from, you're thinking about your grandfather. Amara's hands went still on the keys. I'm always thinking about my grandfather. Her grandfather, Amos, had worked 41 years as a Pullman porter and then as a bellman at a hotel, not unlike the Grand Ashford. In a city not unlike this one, carrying other men's bags, opening other men's doors, wearing a uniform that made him simultaneously essential and invisible, and being called boy into his 60s by men half his age, who tipped him a quarter and never once learned his name. He had come home every night with his dignity folded up small and put away where the world couldn't get at it. And he had told his granddaughter, Ons, when she was 9, and furious about something a teacher had said, the thing that had organized her entire life, they can decide how they treat you? Baby, they don't get to decide who you are. Those are two different powers. Never hand them the second one. Amara had not become invisible rich by accident. She had become it on purpose, as a kind of long game. A debt she was paying to a man who had died before she made her first million. She had spent 20 years quietly buying things, buildings, companies, and now hotels. Grand uns, lama kind, with pojerulama and doormen and gilt ceilings, the kind of rooms her grandfather had spent his life being thrown out of. Or worse, being permitted into only through the service entrance. She had bought the Ashford collection for a lot of reasons a spreadsheet could explain, and one reason a spreadsheet could not, which was that Amos Bishop had carried bags at a hotel exactly like the Grand Ashford. And she had decided, without ever quite saying it aloud, that she was going to own the whole class of buildings that had spent 100 years deciding her grandfather was a suspect in the lobby. He kept beautiful. He'd have hated a fuss. She said quietly, Amos. He'd have said, don't burn the house down. Baby. Other folks got to work there. She closed the laptop. So I'm not going to burn the house down. She looked up at her husband. I'm going to change it. Every floor of it. And I'm going to start with the one man who thought the badge I signed for gave him the right to put his hand on you. Her phone lit up. Donna. Video call. Amara answered and propped the phone against the fruit bowl. Dana's face filled the screen. Glasses pushed up on her forehead. A legal pad already covered in her small, ferocious handwriting. Cameras are copied. All of it. 6 in the evening forward. Honor serveur. Notarized chain of custody. The property's tech staff never touched it. I had our people pull it directly off the recording system remotely, and I've got 2 associates documenting every step so no defense lawyer alive can say it was altered. Dana flipped a page. I've got the lobby master, the desk cam, the porte cochere, and Amara. I watched it. I watched the whole thing. Twice. Her jaw was tight. I'm going to be very professional about this for the rest of this call, and then I'm going to go be a person about it in my kitchen. He put his hand on your hand. I saw it. I know. I was there. The reservation's in the system, time-stamped from Tuesday. The card authorization went through, and then got voided out at 8:54 in the evening after he threw you out. Which means he canceled your legitimate charge on his way to writing you up as a non-guest. That's falsifying a business record before we even get to the fun part. Dana took off her glasses. Now, about the rest. The ledgers. You want to hear it now, or you want to sleep? Now. You were right. Dana said it flatly. I'm still assembling it, and I want the forensic accountants on it Monday before I'd swear to a number. But the shape of it is already ugly. There's an off-book executive protection service guests who want a personal escort, discreet handling, that kind of thing. It's supposed to be comped or billed to the room. A lot of it isn't billed anywhere. It's cash. It goes to Bannister and 2 guys on his crew, and it does not appear to hit the hotel's books at all. That's one stream. Second stream, the lost and found ledger has holes in it you could drive a cart through. High-value items logged in and never logged out. No guest reunification. No disposal record. Watches. Jewelry. A camera. Third, the vendor's shift logs bill for hours that payroll says nobody worked. Ghost shifts. Somebody's approving overtime for people who weren't in the building. And the approver, on all of it, is your director of guest safety. Amara said nothing for a moment. And the reports she asked? The incident reports. The ejections. Dana's face changed. This was the part that had stopped being about money. Amada. That's the one that's going to make you sick. She put her glasses back on. Like armor. I pulled 11 years of suspicious person, and trespass, and guest removal reports that Bannister filed or led. There are a lot of them. And they are. I've read maybe 40 so far, and I stopped because I needed a minute. They are almost entirely black and brown guests and visitors. Some of them were guests with verified reservations. Like you tonight. Some were people meeting guests in the bar. There are at least 4 where a guest was detained by hotel security and questioned, and the write-up justifies it with details that don't match the camera footage from those same nights, which he apparently didn't think anyone would ever pull. He was manufacturing a paper trail, building files to make the profiling look like procedure, and a handful of these people were banned from the property flagged in the system so they couldn't book again. Over nothing. Over walking in the way you walked in tonight. The rain kept coming down on the cedar shingles. How many? Amara said. How many people did he ban? I've counted 9 so far in the flagged system. There may be more across the other 8 properties if he trained anyone. I don't know yet. Amara nodded slowly. She looked at the closed laptop, at the phone propped against the fruit bowl, at her husband standing by the window with his torn sleeve, watching the black lake. Dana, be my friend for 30 seconds. Not my lawyer. Always. Am I doing this because of what he did tonight? Or am I about to use $2.5 billion to feel better about my grandfather? Dana was quiet. It was the right question, and she respected it too much to answer it fast. I've known you 19 years, she said finally. I have never once seen you use the company to settle a personal score. Not once. And I've watched you have plenty of scores worth settling. She leaned toward the camera. But here's what I'd tell you as your lawyer, which happens to also be what I'd tell you as your friend. Even if you walked away tonight and never touched him, even if you decided your grandfather wouldn't want the fuss, those 9 people he banned are still banned. That off-book cash is still coming out of guests' pockets. He is still going to put his hand on somebody else's wife next Friday. The only thing that's different about you, Amada, is that you're the one guest he did it to, who happens to be able to make Monday morning hurt. Most of the people in those reports couldn't. They went home. They carried it. You don't have to. So no. You're not doing this for your grandfather. A pause? You're doing it for the 9. And your grandfather would be fine with that. Amara let out a breath. She felt like she'd been holding for 11 years. Get the forensic team in Saturday. Not Monday, she said. I don't want to wait 3 days while he sleeps fine. And Dana, find me the 9. I want their names. I'm going to call them myself. You're going to call them yourself. Every one of them. Okay. Dana wrote it down. Monday, you become a headline. You know that. Right. The wire crosses Monday. This all lands the same week you go public. There's no keeping these 2 things apart anymore. Amara looked at her husband by the window, at the torn sweatshirt, at the 21 years, at the Black Lake and the coming Monday, and the whole enormous public life about to break over her head like a wave off the breakwater. Good, she said. Then the first thing the world learns about me can be true. Across the city that same night, in a 2-bedroom condo in the suburbs that he'd bought with money, he'd have had a hard time explaining. Kurt Bannister kicked off his shoes, hung his blazer on the back of a chair, and poured himself 3 fingers of a bourbon that cost more than a bellhop made in a shift. He was in a good mood. It had been, in his estimation, a productive Friday. He'd worked the executive protection angle with a nervous businessman in from Houston, $400 in cash for 2 days of discreet handling, none of which would ever touch the hotel's books. He'd relieved the lost and found of a very nice, unclaimed watch that had been sitting there 90 days with no owner coming for it, finders keepers. The way he saw it, and if the ledger never showed it came in, well, that was just tidy bookkeeping. And he'd run off a couple of grifters who'd tried to talk their way into a suite they had no business in, which was the part of the job he actually enjoyed. The part that made him feel like the last real thing standing between the Grand Ashford and the tide of people who'd drag it down to their level if a man like him ever let his guard drop. He carried the bourbon to the second bedroom, the one he used as an office, and sat down at the desk, and opened the bottom drawer, and took out the metal cash box, and added the 400 from Houston to a stack that was already thick, and banded it, and smoothed the band down with his thumb, and put it back. Then he opened his laptop and, out of a caution that was pure habit by now, logged into the incident report system and pulled up the write-up he'd started on the 2 he'd thrown out tonight. He read it over. He'd been generous with himself. 2 individuals. No verifiable reservation. Exhibiting suspicious behavior. Distributing cash to staff, possible attempt to solicit or bribe. Became verbally aggressive when approached. Removed from property without incident. Removed without incident. He liked that line. He'd written it, or a version of it, 100 times. It had never once failed him. Nobody ever pulled the cameras on a couple of nobodies who got walked out of a lobby. Who would? They were gone. They weren't coming back. That was the beauty of the whole thing. The people you did this to were, almost by definition, people no one was going to come asking about. He saved the report. He raised his glass to the dark window, to his own dim reflection, to 11 good years and a cash box that never stopped filling. He had absolutely no idea that 14 miles north, in a lake house, a forensic accounting team was already being pulled in on a Saturday, that every camera angle he'd never worried about was already copied and notarized on servers he could not reach and could not delete, that a woman was sitting at a kitchen table writing down 9 names, and that the report he had just saved removed without incident was going to be read aloud. Someday, in a courtroom, next to the footage of exactly what the incident had been, he finished the bourbon. It was the last night Kurt Bannister was ever going to sleep easy. Monday morning came up clean and cold and blue. The kind of hard, bright autumn light off the lake that makes the limestone of the old buildings look scrubbed. At 7:52 in the morning, Kurt Bannister swiped his badge at the staff entrance of the Grand Ashford, whistling, a travel mug of coffee in one hand. He'd had a good weekend. The Bears had covered. He'd added to the box. Life was, as far as he could see it, good. His badge beeped red. He frowned, swiped again, read again. He rapped on the glass. And a security guard he barely knew, one of the day crew, came and opened the door from the inside, and did not smile, and did not say good morning. Kurt, they want you upstairs. Who wants me upstairs? 3rd floor. Executive conference room. The guard would not meet his eyes. Now, something cold moved in Bannister's stomach for the first time in a very long time. He rode the elevator up. He stepped out onto the 3rd floor, the executive floor, where he had maybe been 3 times in 11 years. The conference room door was open. He could see, through it, a long table of dark wood, and he could see people already seated at it, and the first face he recognized was Diane Pruitt, the night duty manager, sitting rigid, gray-faced, her hands flat on the table, like a woman waiting for a verdict. Beside her sat a woman he did not know, in a charcoal suit, with a leather folio and a legal pad, and an expression of perfect, terrible calm. That was Dena Ferreira, though he didn't know it yet. At the far end of the table sat Marisol Vega, the desk agent, her eyes red-rimmed, a single sheet of paper in front of her. "What is this?" Bannister said. From the doorway. Nobody answered him. He came in and sat down anyway, because sitting down was the last small thing he still had the power to do. And he folded his arms across his chest, and he told himself it was a formality, a complaint, a stern talking to about the volume of his voice on a busy Friday. He'd weathered those before. The conference room door opened again. Amara and Elias Bishop walked in. The sweatshirt was gone. The sneakers were gone. Amara wore a suit the color of slate, her hair pulled back, small pearl studs, a plain gold pin on her lapel that Dana had nodded at when she'd passed. And she moved into that room the way she moved into every room she had ever bought, without hurry, without noise, taking up exactly as much space as she required, which was all of it. Elias wore a good dark jacket and his wedding ring, and the face of a man who had decided to be present for something he did not need to enjoy. Kurt Bannister's face went through 4 things in about a second and a half. Recognition, then confusion, then the beginning of a denial, and then, last, a small, involuntary sound from the back of his throat. The sound a man makes when the floor he's standing on turns out to be a trapdoor, and everyone in the room heard it, and no one pretended they hadn't. Diane Pruitt closed her eyes. Amara did not sit. She walked the length of the table to the head of it, and she set a leather folder down on the wood in front of Kurt Bannister, and she did not open it. "Mr. Bannister," she said. He didn't answer. His mouth was dry. His coffee was cooling in his hand, and he had forgotten he was holding it. "Open it," she said. He opened it with a hand that had started, very slightly, to shake. The first page was the acquisition summary. The Ashford Collection, acquired by Halcyon Meridian Partners. Signatory Amara O. Bishop, Chairman. He read the name. He looked up at the woman standing at the head of the table. He looked back down. The second page was the management agreement for the flagship property, 140 Michigan Avenue, same name at the bottom. The third page was the master services agreement with Redline Protective Group, the security firm, his employer. The source of the badge clipped to his own chest, at that moment renewed 9 days ago. Sama Nama. Same signature. The fourth page was his own personnel file, his employment terms, countersigned by an entity he had never once in 11 years bothered to look up, which rolled up 2 layers north into Halcyon Meridian Partners. Sama Name, Sam Signature, 4 pages. 4 times his own eyes crossed the same name at the bottom of documents that owned the badge on his chest. The marble under his shoes, the coffee going cold in his hand. 4 times the same signature, a woman's signature, blue ink, unhurried, and with every page, the room got a little smaller, and the air got a little thinner. And the certainty that had carried Kurt Bannister across that lobby for 11 years came apart in his fingers like the wet thread of a torn sweatshirt. Kurt Bannister did not speak. His tongue was stuck to the roof of his mouth, the travel mug tilted in his hand, and a thread of coffee ran down the side of it. And he did not notice. Because for the first time in 11 years, the man whose entire job was noticing had lost the ability to notice anything at all except the name on the page. Amara's voice, when she spoke, was very quiet, and it filled the room precisely because it was quiet. 9 days ago, she said, My company bought this hotel, a beat, and the 8 others like it, and the management company that runs them, and the contract for the security firm whose blazer you are wearing in this room. Right now, while you sit at my table, on my floor, she let each one drop like a stone into still water. The paycheck that cleared your account on Friday afternoon. At 4:11, the one you cashed on your way to a good weekend was, in the most literal sense, the law recognizes, signed by me. She let that one sit the longest. You asked me on Friday night how a woman like me came to have a reservation for a $1,400 suite. I told you I would answer that. And I keep my word. So here it is. I own the building the suite is in. I own the bed you decided I couldn't afford. I own the marble you shoved my husband across. I own the revolving door you put your palm between his shoulder blades to force him through into the rain, in front of 40 of my guests, while a manager who worked for me told you only to keep your voice down. She set both hands flat on the folder. And I own the badge, the little tin badge that made you feel like the last real thing standing between this lobby and people who look like me. You thought that badge was your power? Mr. Bannister, that badge was mine. I was only letting you hold it. Bannister's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. You tore a 20-year-old sweatshirt off my husband's shoulder. Amara continued. In a building I own. You struck my hand in front of 40 of my guests. You called him boy. You told me the report you'd write would not read the way I'd like it to. And then you went back to that desk. And you canceled our legitimate charge. And you wrote us up as suspicious persons removed without incident. She tapped the folder once. I've read the report, Mr. Bannister, and I've watched the footage of the incident, and I've noticed that they do not describe the same night. Silence. Bannister found, from somewhere, the reflex that men like him always find, which is the reflex to talk. Ms. Bishop, there's clearly been a terrible misunderstanding. I follow protocol. I follow it to the letter. I had no way of knowing if I had known who you. If you had known who I was. Amara repeated. And for the first time, something moved in her voice. Something with an edge on it. Yes. If you had known I was the owner, you'd have treated me differently. I understand that completely. That's not the defense you think it is. Mr. Bannister, that's the confession. Because there were 9 other people over 11 years who walked in the way I walked in on Friday with reservations. With cards. With every right to be there, and you didn't know who any of them were either. And you threw them out too. And some of them you banned. And their only crime, exactly like mine, was that they looked like they didn't belong in a room you'd appointed yourself the guardian of. She closed the folder. You didn't treat me badly because you failed to recognize me. You treated me badly because you did recognize me. You recognized my grandfather. Bannister did not understand that last part. Nobody in the room but Elias did. But every person at that table understood the thing underneath it. And Diane Pruitt put a hand over her mouth. You're finished, Amara said. Today, this hour, Dana Ferreira slid a single sheet across the table. A termination notice. Effective immediately. Cause physical assault of guests. Racially discriminatory conduct. Falsification of business records. Pending investigation into financial misconduct. At the bottom, a line for a signature. Bannister looked at it. I'm not. You can't just, I have rights. I have a contract. You have a contract, Dana said, in the pleasant flat voice of a lawyer who has already won, with a firm my client now owns, which contains a 4-cause termination clause that I personally reviewed at 2 a.m. on Saturday, and which you triggered on Friday night on camera, in front of 40 witnesses. several of whom have already come forward. You're welcome to have your own attorney review it. I'd encourage it. Sign or don't sign, the effect is identical. But I'd note for the record that you've been read your termination in the presence of counsel and management, and that the investigation into the cash box in your second bedroom is a separate matter entirely, and one that is no longer in this hotel's hands. The blood drained out of Bannister's face at the words, cash box in your second bedroom. He signed the paper. The pen scratched. The signature came out cramped and slanted and small, like the handwriting of a much smaller man. A uniformed member of the day security crew was already standing in the hallway. He escorted Bannister down to the basement to clear his locker. Bannister put 11 years into a cardboard box, a spare tie, a phone charger, a framed photo of himself shaking hands with a mayor at some long-ago ribbon cutting, and carried the box back up to the ground floor, and had to walk the length of the lobby to reach the door. The Monday morning lobby was full. Different people than Friday, at the usual churn, but the news travels through a hotel staff faster than through any wire. And every bellhop and every desk agent and every server crossing that floor knew, by the time Bannister walked it, exactly who the man with the cardboard box was and exactly what he'd done. Nobody said goodbye. Walter, at his post by the bronze door, watched him come the whole length of the marble and did not open the door for him, made him do it himself. 31 years. And it was the one small act of dignity available to an old man in a long coat, and he took it. Bannister reached the revolving door, the same door, and he paused, and he looked back. Once. At the desk, Marisol Vega was standing behind it. She had her arms folded. She watched him without a flicker. I told the truth, she said. 4 words. Quiet. Steady. That's all. I wrote down what I saw, and I told the truth, and I would do it again. Bannister opened his mouth. Nothing came. He pushed through the revolving door into the cold, bright Monday, and the drum spun shut behind him. And behind the glass the lobby did not move. And nobody asked if he was okay. And the whole thing ran in exactly the opposite direction it had run on Friday. And the arithmetic was the same. Upstairs, Diane Pruitt was still in her chair. She tried the only defense she had, which was the defense the complicit always try. The one that has never once worked and never once stopped anyone from reaching for it. Ms. Bishop, I want you to know it happened so fast. I didn't. I'm not trained for a situation like that. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. It escalated before I could. You said, keep your voice down. Amara's voice was not cruel. That was the worst of it. For Diane, it was not cruel. It was just accurate. There was a man putting his hands on 2 of your guests. And you had 18 years of authority in that building. And the only sentence you could find was, keep your voice down. The guests are uncomfortable. You didn't lack the training. Ms. Pruitt, you lacked the will. You knew exactly what was happening. You knew it was wrong. You'd known for years, Walter told me. Some of you had watched it for years, and you decided, one more time, that the comfort of the room mattered more than the safety of the 2 people being thrown out of it. She turned to Dana. Administrative leave. Unpaid. Pending review. She's not the one who put his hands on us, but she's the reason he thought he could. Diane Pruitt looked at the table, and she did not look up again. But here is the part of that morning that did not happen at the head of the table. That happened quietly, at the far end, and that mattered more than all of it. When Bannister had thrown the couple out on Friday night and gone back to his desk to write his report, he had needed a second signature. Hotel policy required a manager or a lead agent to co-sign any guest removal incident report. He had turned to Marisol Vega, 6 weeks on the job. The newest person on the floor, the easiest to lean on, and he had put his write-up in front of her. The one that said, removed without incident. Distributing cash. Verbally aggressive. And he had said, sign it. And Marisol Vega, 26 years old. 6 weeks off probation. Terrified of a man who could end her job with a phone call. Had read the report. And had seen that it described a night that had not occurred. And had said the hardest small word there is, which is no and nay. That's not what happened. She'd told him, her voice shaking. They had a reservation. It's in the system. The card cleared. I'm not signing that. Bannister had leaned in close and told her she'd regret it, and had found someone on the night crew to co-sign instead, and had made a note to have her let go by the end of the month. But Marisol had gone home that night and typed her own version, the true one, with the timestamp. I saw it, and on Saturday morning, before anyone told her to, before she knew the woman was the owner, before she had any way of knowing it would matter, she had walked into the office of the hotel's human resources director and filed a formal report of her own, describing exactly what she had witnessed, and describing the falsified report she had refused to sign. She had done it, not knowing it would be rewarded. She had, in fact, done it fairly certain it would cost her the job she badly needed. She had done it because her grandmother had a saying about the difference between easy and right, and because she had decided, standing behind that desk on Friday night, that whatever else she was going to be in this world, she was not going to be one of the 40 people behind the glass. When the meeting broke, Amara crossed the room to the far end of the table. Ms. Vega. Mari stood up so fast she knocked her chair. Ms. Bishop. I'm sorry. I know I'm probably not supposed to. You refused to sign a false report, Amara said. From a man who had power over your job. 6 weeks into that job, when you had no way of knowing anyone would ever back you up. And then you filed the truth on your own time, expecting to be fired for it. She looked at the young woman for a long moment. Do you know how rare that is? I have run companies for 20 years. I have watched people with far more security and far less to lose stay silent to protect far smaller things than a paycheck. What you did on Friday night is the rarest thing in any building I've ever owned. A pause. You're not going to be let go. Ms. Vega, we're going to talk, when the dust settles, about a very different future for you here. For now. Thank you. The whole case turns on the fact that one person in that lobby wrote down the truth. That person was you, Mari, who had braced all weekend to be fired, sat back down, and put her face in her hands, and cried in a way she'd been holding since Friday. And Amara put a hand on her shoulder and let her, by Wednesday. The two tracks, the criminal and the civil, were running on parallel rails. And they were running fast. Because $2.5 billion of new ownership had decided they should. The financial investigation went to Detective Renata Vaughn of the department's Financial Crimes Unit. A tall, unhurried woman in her late 40s, with a voice she rarely raised and a way of looking at a person that made them stop lying without her having to ask them to. She had been a detective for 19 years. She had grown up on the West Side. She had a plaque on her desk that her daughter had made her, and a case clearance rate that made younger detectives nervous, and no patience left. At this stage of her life, for men who mistook a badge for a license to hunt, she pulled the cash box out of the second bedroom on a Thursday morning with a warrant in her hand. She counted, with the forensic team, $61,000 in banded bills that corresponded to no legitimate income stream, alongside a lost and found watch worth $11,000 that had been logged into the hotel's system 4 months earlier and never logged out. She matched the ghost shifts to payroll. She read the 11 years of falsified reports. And she read the 4 detentions where the write-up did not match the footage. And she found the 9 banned guests. And she pulled 2 of them in to give statements. And she listened to a woman describe being questioned by hotel security in a back hallway on her own wedding anniversary while her husband stood beside her with his hands open. And she took a break after that one. The way even 19-year detectives sometimes have to. When they arrested Kurt Bannister, it was on a Friday. 1 week to the day. Vaughn did it herself. At his condo. In the morning, the charges ran long multiple counts of theft, falsifying business records, a civil rights count for the pattern of unlawful detentions under color of a security authority, and a simple assault charge for the strike to Amara Bishop's hand added after Marisol Vega and Walter and the bride-to-be from the candlelit table and 2 of the men from the fireplace had all on their own, come into the precinct and given sworn statements they were not required to give. Bannister came to the door in a robe. He had a travel mug of coffee in his hand. Out of 11 years of habit, Vaughn read him his rights, while 2 uniformed officers stood behind her, and Bannister, being who he was, tried the last move in the only playbook he had. He looked at Detective Vaughn, really looked at her. For the first time, taking her in, and he lowered his voice to something that almost passed for friendly, something conspiratorial, something that assumed a thing about her he had no right to assume. "Detective," he said, "come on. Look, you and me. We understand each other. Right, we've both been out there. We both know what the job's really like. We both know what kind of people come through a lobby and what kind of trouble they bring. And everybody wants to pretend they don't until something goes missing." He tried a smile. "You get it. You and me. We're the same. You know I was just doing the job nobody else has the stomach for." Renata Vaughn let him finish. She let the whole thing hang in the cold morning air. Then she snapped the second cuff closed. And she leaned in close. Close enough that he could not look away. "You keep saying you and me, Mr. Bannister." Her voice was very quiet. "So let me tell you the only thing you and I actually have in common. We both know down to the last detail, down to the exact minute precisely what you did to those people. That's it. That's the whole list. Everything else you think we share, you made up in your head. The same way you made up 9 reports about 9 people whose only crime was walking through a door looking like me." She straightened up. "I'm not on your side. I never was. I'm on the side of the 40 people who finally decided to write it down." She put her hand on the top of his head and guided him into the back of the car. The drive to Central Booking took 22 minutes. Kurt Bannister did not say another word. Amada, in the meantime, was doing her own quiet work. And she was doing it herself. She took the list of 9. The 9 people Kurt Bannister had banned from the Grand Ashford over 11 years. Whose records sat flagged in the system as though they were the ones who'd done something wrong, and she did not hand it to her communications team. Because she did not want it handled. She did not hand it to her foundation. She picked up the phone at her own kitchen table, and she called them. One at a time, she told each of them who she was. She told them what had happened to her and her husband on a Friday night in a lobby they'd both walked through with reservations. She told them she had read their file, and that she was sorry, and that the ban had already been lifted, and that their record had been cleared, and that if they wanted to bring a civil claim, she would pay for their attorney personally, and she would not need to be involved beyond writing the check. The first man she called had been thrown out in front of his teenage son 8 years earlier and had never told anyone at his job, because he'd been afraid of how the story would sound. He was quiet for a long time on the phone. Then he said, "You're telling me somebody finally pulled the tape?" And Amara said, "Somebody finally pulled the tape." And he said, "I always knew what happened. I just could never prove it." My son saw the whole thing. He's 24 now. He still brings it up. And Amara said, "Then tell your son." A stranger pulled the tape. And it said exactly what he remembers. The man did not speak for almost a minute. Then he said, in a different voice, "Yeah, I'll do the claim. Not for the money. So there's a record." 3 of the 9 said yes right away. 4 said they'd think about it. One woman, the one who'd been questioned in a back hallway on her wedding anniversary, cried for 11 minutes on the phone and then said yes. The 9th had moved out of state and did not want to reopen it. And Amara respected that, and cleared his record anyway, and told him the door was open if he ever changed his mind. Amara did not tell anyone she had done this. It did not go in a press release. She simply did it, on a series of afternoons, with a legal pad and a cup of coffee, because it was the thing that needed doing, and she had never in her life understood the point of being able to do a thing and then paying someone else to do it worse. It was the reporter, Adaora Bello, who found out about the 9. 3 weeks later, when the civil filings hit the public docket, Bello was an investigative journalist who'd spent 2 years working a series on the invisible mechanics of racial profiling in high-end retail and hospitality, the security guard who follows you, the concierge who assumes your staff. Though we've had a lot of incidents lately that always seems to precede a black family being asked to prove they belong. She'd been looking for the story that would let readers see it. And here it was, a security director who had systematized it into a paper trail at a 100-year-old Grand Hotel. At the exact moment, that hotel's new owner turned out to be one of the people he'd thrown into the rain. She ran it as a 3-part series. She was careful, and she was thorough, and she did not need to embellish anything, because the footage and the ledgers and the falsified reports did all the work. The first part ran on a Sunday. By Tuesday, half the city was talking about it. By the end of the week, it had jumped to the national wires landing. As it happened, the same week, Amara Bishop had already become a headline for buying the Ashford collection in the first place. So that the 2 stories fused into one, and the woman who had spent 20 years being invisible rich became, in the space of a single news cycle, extremely visible, in exactly the way she'd been dreading and exactly the way she'd decided to accept. Halcyon Meridian's communications team drafted a long, careful, lawyerly statement. Amara threw it out and wrote 3 sentences herself. On her phone, in the back of a cab, the same way she'd promised Dana, the first thing the world learned about her would be true. This happened in a building I own. To my family and to 9 other families before mine. It has been handled. And the people it happened to have been made whole. We are not finished. Because a business that lets this happen once has a culture that will let it happen again. And I intend to change the culture. The statement went out under her own name. It was, the media noted, an unusual thing for a billionaire to sign personally. Amara did not find it unusual at all. She found it the least she could do. Kurt Bannister's criminal case did not go to trial. His first attorney was a lawyer he'd used years earlier. A man who specialized in defending private security personnel and who had, as it turned out, once done contract work, drafting employee conduct policies for Redline Protective Group itself. The firm withdrew within 6 hours of reviewing the file. Conflict of interest. The email said, Redline was now a subsidiary of an entity owned by the complaining party, and the firm could not ethically continue. His second attorney, a public defender assigned after the first, withdrew, looked at the notarized camera footage, and the forensic accounting on the cash box, and the 11 years of reports whose details contradicted the tapes, and the sworn statements from a doorman and a bride and a desk agent and 2 strangers from a fireplace, and gave Bannister the only honest advice available, which was to take the plea He pleaded guilty to theft, to falsifying business records, to the civil rights count, and to the simple assault. At sentencing, the judge, a woman with half-moon reading glasses and 30 years on the bench, looked at Kurt Bannister over the top of them and spoke for a little under a minute. And the courtroom was very quiet. "Mr. Bannister," she said, "I want to be precise about what this was, because I think the precision matters. This was not a man who made one bad decision on one busy Friday night. The record in front of me describes 11 years. It describes a man who took the uniform of safety, the specific costume we hand to the people we trust to protect us, and used it, methodically and profitably, to hunt the very people he was paid to protect, and to steal, calmly and consistently, from the people who paid him. You did not fail to do your job. You inverted it. You turned the instrument of protection into an instrument of predation. And you built a paper trail so that the predation would look like procedure. And you were careful. And you were patient. And you counted on one thing above all others, that the people you did this to would be people no one would ever come asking about. You were right about that. For 11 years, you were wrong about it once. And the harm you did does not end with the dollars in that box, or even with the 9 people you banned. It lives in the building. It lives in every guest of a certain complexion who will now hesitate at a grand door, wondering, because of men like you, whether tonight is the night they'll have to prove they belong. That hesitation is your true theft. Mr. Bannister. And there is no restitution schedule for it. She took her reading glasses off. The courtroom did not breathe. She sentenced him to 44 months in a state facility. Full restitution, every dollar in the box. And the value of the watch, and the cost of the care those 9 families had been left to carry alone. And a permanent bar from ever holding a private security license in the state again. No badge. No lanyard. No uniform. No grand door to stand beside, deciding who was allowed to walk through it, not for the rest of his life. The man who had built a career out of deciding who belonged was going to spend the next 44 months being told, every single morning, in a voice not his own, exactly where he belonged. Bannister did not look up. Diane Pruitt was terminated for cause the same week. Red Line Protective Group's master services contract was terminated across all 9 properties within 30 days. The 2 crew members who'd shared in the off-book cash were dismissed and referred for their own charges. And the culture audit Amara had ordered on the first night, every property, every vendor, every incident report going back a decade became, by the following January, binding policy across the entire Ashford collection. The reforms were not decorative, because Amara did not do decorative. Every incident report at every property now went to a third-party auditor who did not work for the hotel and could not be. Every guest removal required camera review within 24 hours. The off-book executive protection cash structure was abolished entirely and replaced with a transparent bill on-the-books concierge security service. Every property adopted a plainly worded guest bill of rights, printed and framed at the front desk, and an ombudsman line that went directly to Halcyon Meridian and not to any manager on site. And every new hire, every desk agent, every bellhop, every security officer, every manager now went through a 1-day training on their first day before they ever touched a guest. The training had been designed by Marisol Vega, because Mari was not a front desk agent anymore. 6 months after that Friday night, she was the Grand Ashford's guest experience manager, with an office on the mezzanine and a mandate that Amara had written in a single sentence and Mari had made her own. The first line of the training, she built the line every new employee of the Ashford collection now reads on their first morning. Printed at the top of the first page was simple, and it was hers. And it went, Every person who walks through these doors is our guest, until they prove otherwise, and otherwise is never how they look. The first person Mari hired into her department was a quiet young man who had been working nights as a bellhop while grinding through prerequisites at a community college, whose mother had been sick, and who had been kind to a stranger's luggage cart on the worst night of that stranger's year. Theo Mensa was on the Grand Ashford's front desk now. Days. Full-time. With benefits. Finishing his nursing prerequisites on a schedule the hotel arranged around his classes. His mother, Grace, was doing better. The bishops had, without any announcement, quietly covered 18 months of the kind of care that comes with a case manager and does not come cheap. Theo did not know, for a long time, who had paid for it. When he finally figured it out, he tried to thank Amara, and she cut him off the same way she'd cut off the incidentals on Friday night, and told him to go help the family checking in at the desk. Their cart was shifting. Walter, the doorman, 31 years at his post, was invited to the ribbon on the new employee lounge, which the hotel had built out of a storage room, and which the staff, on their own, without being asked, had voted to name for him. There is a brass plaque on the door of it now. It does not say anything about the owners, and in the lobby, by the front desk, small and easy to miss, there is one more brass plaque. Amara had it mated. It is not a monument to a rich couple who got thrown out and got even, because Amara had thought carefully about the difference between those two things and had no interest at all in the second one. It bears no names. It bears 11 words, and they are the words of a 26-year-old desk agent who refused to sign a lie. I wrote down what I saw, and I told the truth. 6 months to the day after the night in the rain, on a bright, cold Friday evening off the lake, Amara and Elias Bishop walked back into the Grand Ashford. He was wearing the Fisk sweatshirt. It had been mended. Amara had taken it, without telling him, to a tailor who did invisible work, and the torn seam at the shoulder was closed, now with a hand so careful you'd have to know exactly where to look. She had not, in the end, thrown it away. She had understood, somewhere in the last 6 months, that the sweatshirt was not the thing that had been torn on Friday night, and that mending it was the closest she could come to mending the other thing. She wore the same worn white sneakers. They had argued about it that morning, the way they argued about everything that didn't matter, and she had let him win. Because letting him win was, after 21 years, one of her favorite things to do. The revolving door turned. The bronze drum swept them into the gold light. And the lobby did what the lobby was designed to do, welcomed them, assessed them, except that the assessment came out different now, because the culture behind it was different now, because a young woman on the mezzanine had written 11 words on the first page of the first day. Walter had the door. Evening. Folks, welcome home. It's good to be home. Walter, Amara said, and meant it in about 4 different ways. At the front desk, Theo Mensa looked up, and his whole face opened. Mr. and Mrs. Bishop. He came around the desk, which was not strictly procedure, and shook Elias's hand, and would have hugged Amara if the desk between them hadn't stopped him. Your suite's ready. 1404. I upgraded the well. It's ready. Mari's going to want to know you're here. The new general manager, a woman named Grace Adiemi, whom Amara had promoted from a struggling Ashford property in Atlanta, and who had turned it around inside a year, came out from behind the desk and greeted them both by name. She did not greet them, because she recognized the owners, though of course she did. She greeted them because every single person on that floor now greeted every single person who walked through the door. Warmly. by whatever name they gave, until and unless they proved otherwise and otherwise. The first page said, "Is never how they look. It was, in every way that mattered. A different room, same marble, same 40-foot ceiling with the painted lake, same fireplace you could park a Honda in. Different room, that night, in suite 1404. At a small table by the window, with the lake gone black and gold-flecked with the city's light. They had dinner for their anniversary 21 years. Officially, that Sunday, gotten ahead of again. Room service pancakes. Because Amara had insisted. At 8 at night. And the kitchen had made them without a word. And this time it was Elias who reached into his jacket and set a small box on the table between them. Amara looked at it. "It's not my anniversary yet. You're the one who gets ahead of it now. I learned from the best." He pushed it toward her. "Open it." She opened it. Inside was a small brass luggage tag. Old style. The kind a bellman would once have looped onto a suitcase handle 100 years ago. In a lobby like the one downstairs, the kind her grandfather Amos had handled 10,000 times a shift for 41 years, while men who never learned his name called him boy. Elias had found one. Real brass. Worn soft at the edges. And had it cleaned. And had it engraved. She turned it over. The engraving on the back was not about the hotel. And it was not about the money. And it was not about the man who'd thrown them into the rain, who by then was a number in a state facility and not worth the brass. It was 6 months of Elias watching his wife become the most public version of herself she had ever been. Watching the cameras find her, and the invitations arrive, and the whole enormous machinery of visible wealth crank up around a woman who had spent her whole life avoiding it. And it was Elias, the history teacher, the conscience with a driver's license, giving her the one thing he was afraid all of it might take. It was her grandfather's sentence, the one Amos had given her at 9 years old. Furious in a kitchen, Elias had carried it for 21 years, and now he gave it back to her in brass, so that no matter how big the life got, she would have it in her hand. They decide how they treat you. They don't decide who you are. Amara did not speak for a long moment. She turned the tag over in her fingers. Then she looped it onto her key ring, next to the ordinary fob of an ordinary sedan, where she would see it every single day for the rest of a life that was about to get very large. 21 years, she said. Finally, when she trusted her voice, "And you still know exactly what I'm most afraid of. That's the job." He reached across the little table and took her hand, the same hand a stranger had struck in a lobby 6 months earlier. The back of it. And she let him hold it. "Somebody has to remember who you were before the marble. Might as well be the guy in the used dictionary business." She laughed. "Ons. Vet." And put her head on his shoulder. The way she had in the car 6 months ago, and the way she'd done for 21 years. And outside the window, the lake kept doing what the lake does. And the city lights kept smearing gold across the black water. And downstairs, in a lobby full of strangers, a young woman named Mari was teaching a brand new hire. On his very first night, the first line on the first page, "Here is the thing about that night in the rain." Though, the thing worth sitting with. After the folder, and the plea, and the brass plaque, and the pancakes, almost nobody who gets thrown into the rain, the way Amara and Elias Bishop got thrown into the rain, owns the building. Almost nobody has a Dana Ferreira to call on a Friday night. Almost nobody has notarized camera footage on a private server by midnight, and a forensic accounting team pulled in on a Saturday. Almost nobody has $2.5 billion to make Monday morning hurt. Almost everybody just goes home. They go home and they don't tell anyone, because they're afraid of how the story will sound. The way a man was afraid to tell his job that he'd been thrown out in front of his own teenage son. They carry it, fold it up small, put away where the world can't get at it. The way Amos Bishop carried 41 years of it home every single night. And the man at the desk writes removed without incident. And nobody ever pulls the tape. And he does it again next Friday. And again. And again. For 11 years. Because he counted on exactly one thing above all others, that the people he did it to would be people no one ever came asking about. So if you watch this story, and you got hot when he grabbed that sweatshirt, and you felt something click into place when Amara set that folder on the table good, that's a real feeling. Hold on to it for a second. Then put it down and look at it honestly. Because here is the part the folder can't fix. The reason things ever change is not that the powerful occasionally get embarrassed. Amara Bishop didn't change that hotel because she was rich. She changed it because a 26-year-old desk agent, 6 weeks into a job she couldn't afford to lose, read a false report and said no. That's not what happened. I'm not signing that before she had any idea who the woman in the sneakers was, expecting to be fired for it. And did it anyway. The world doesn't change because the billionaire gets even. It changes because of the mayoress behind the desk who won't sign the lie. It changes because of the Walters at the door who've watched it for 31 years and finally decide the guests in the rain matter more than the peace of the lobby. It changes because of the bride at the candlelit table who finally gives the statement, and the strangers from the fireplace who walk into a precinct on a Tuesday to say a thing no one required them to say. It changes because 40 people behind the glass, one at a time, in 100 lobbies, decide they are done being the 40 people behind the glass. That's the whole engine. That's all it's ever been. So let me ask you, and mean it, have you ever been in a lobby, a store, a restaurant, an elevator, a bank, and watched somebody get treated like a suspect for the crime of simply existing in a nice room? Did you say something? Would you say something now? And the harder question, the one worth answering honestly in the comments if it had been you at that desk on Friday night? Terrified. 6 weeks into a job you needed, would you have signed the report? Or would you have said no? Tell me below. Tell me the truth. Tell me about the time you were one of the 40 and the time W's. Maybe. That you weren't? Hit like if you'd have refused to sign it. Subscribe. Because part 2 is coming. And what the forensic team found buried in the other 8 hotels of the Ashford collection. The reports Kurt Bannister trained other people to write. In other cities. In other lobbies. On other Friday nights goes a great deal deeper than one cash box under one bed. The world doesn't change because the powerful get embarrassed. It changes the day the rest of us decide we are not going to stand behind the glass anymore.